The fundamental, terrifying truth of the current geopolitical climate is that the full-scale war between Russia and the West is not a future threat. It has already begun, not with tank columns rolling across the Ukrainian border, but in the insidious form of a hybrid invasion targeting the very political and social foundations of Europe. The widespread complacency in Western capitals, treating the conflict as a distant regional skirmish, is a catastrophic strategic blunder that is actively enabling the Kremlin's grand design. This is FPV Explainer, where we break down the most fascinating stories in drone warfare. If you're enjoying this deep dive, hit the like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us what topic you want to see next. Your feedback shapes our future videos and keeps us bringing you clear, detailed analysis from the front lines. Also, please watch this video to the very end, even if you play it in the background without sound, as your continuous viewing is critical to help promote the truth about the war. The core objective of this hybrid invasion is not merely territorial gain, but the total systemic collapse of the European political and security order. The leader's aggression in Ukraine was always intended as the first phase of a broader global conflict. This was made unequivocally clear by his explicit demand that NATO retreat to its 1997 borders. This audacious demand was not a starting point for negotiation, it was a non-negotiable strategic goal to dismantle the entire post-Cold War security architecture and establish a new global order defined by the right of force. The conflict has crossed the border because the Kremlin understands it cannot win a conventional war against a unified military and economic might of the West. Therefore, the invasion has been executed through a doctrine of asymmetric destabilization, targeting the core vulnerabilities of democracy, its internal divisions, its reliance on consensus, and its tolerance for political extremism. The military action in Ukraine serves as a massive, visible distraction, while the covert operation focuses on fracturing the cohesion of the European Union and neutralizing the collective defense mechanism of NATO. The symptoms of this ongoing hybrid invasion are clear and manifest across the continent. This is a deliberate, multi-front assault that utilizes political operatives, organized crime, and mass propaganda instead of conventional forces. It employs the weaponization of migration on NATO borders, the relentless funding of extremist and Eurosceptic political parties within parliaments, and the continuous erosion of public trust in democratic institutions. The entire strategy relies on the hope that when the military pressure finally comes, when Russian drones fly over Europe, the political system will be so fragmented by internal chaos and corrupted by pro-Kremlin agents that a unified, decisive military response will be impossible. The current complacency in Europe is not a sign of security. It is a clear measure of the success of the Kremlin's corrosive long-term hybrid war strategy.
We have established the terrifying scale of the hybrid invasion. But to grasp its direct military threat, we must expose the second, darker front, the state-sponsored use of international terrorist cells. The Kremlin is not just relying on propaganda, it is actively co-opting, training, and weaponizing genuine extremist groups, proving that the war against the West is already being fought by combat-ready proxies. The shocking reality is that the Russian state, while claiming to fight Nazism in Ukraine, is providing a safe haven and military education for authentic international neo-Nazis and far-right militants. The key operational hub for this is the paramilitary training camp known as Partizan near St. Petersburg, linked to the US-sanctioned Russian imperial movement. This camp serves as a tactical finishing school, giving militants from the US, Canada, and Northern Europe training in combat tactics, small arms handling, and explosives. This is a direct, undeniable link. The violence seen on Western streets is being planned and honed on Russian soil. The perpetrators of bombings in Sweden and plots by organizations like the Base in the US have direct documented ties to this Russian training pipeline. The most potent example of this threat is the highly organized paramilitary group, the Slovenskí Branci. This is not a harmless political youth group. It is a meticulously constructed sleeper combat cell positioned deep within a NATO member state. Members of the Branci have been confirmed to have traveled to Russia for military training at the partisan camp. More alarmingly, some of their most experienced members have served as mercenaries on the side of pro-Russian separatists in the Donbass conflict, giving them direct, lethal combat experience. The ideological framework of the Branci perfectly exploits European division. These militants justify their existence not through aggression, but by claiming to defend traditional Christian values against the ultra-liberalism of the European Union, anti-immigrant narratives, and Western political consensus. This ideological disguise makes them effective as a domestic destabilizing force. But the danger is purely military. These cells are trained for specific anti-NATO operations. The Branci have openly published documentation showing their training exercises focusing on seizing control of border crossings and key infrastructure choke points. This is a direct, undeniable military capability aimed at paralyzing NATO's logistical chain. If Russia initiates a conventional attack against a frontline state like Poland or the Baltics, these trained, ideologically motivated cells are positioned to emerge from the domestic population to execute synchronized sabotage operations, blocking reinforcements, disrupting communications, and sowing chaos deep in the rear. The Kremlin's strategy is clear. It is building an army of proxies within Europe itself. The paramilitary structure and combat experience of these groups confirm that they are not mere political agitators. They are a direct, existential threat ready to activate the moment the central government in Moscow gives the order. This is the invasion that doesn't use tanks. It uses trained, ideologically radicalized citizens to wage war on democracy from the inside.
We have analyzed the external military threat posed by terror cells. Now we confront the political mechanism that enables it, the deliberate campaign of corruption and blackmail targeting the highest echelons of European government. This is the Trojan Horse strategy, an insidious, coordinated effort by the Kremlin to paralyze the democratic world by compromising its leaders and weaponizing their venality against the alliance. The most damning evidence of this political warfare is found in the leadership of key Eastern European states, most notably in Slovakia and Hungary. These nations are not simply holding differing political views. Their leaders are actively serving as internal agents of paralysis, their loyalty purchased or coerced by Moscow's operational methods. Consider the case of Robert Fico, the current Prime Minister of Slovakia. His political trajectory is a case study in compromised governance. Despite a 2-decade-long trail of monumental corruption scandals, including documented audio recordings linking him to secret political financing and influence peddling, Fico consistently returns to power. His longevity is rooted in the strategic support he receives from an electorate polarized around traditional values, an ideological frame that Moscow expertly exploits. The true operational threat, however, is the compromat held by the Kremlin. Fico's career has been dogged by his association with figures tied to organized crime and corruption, like the infamous Guerrilla scandal. The Kremlin, through its network of former KGB and intelligence assets, gains critical leverage by simply allowing these leaders to remain in power, while retaining the evidence that could instantly destroy them. This provides Moscow with a perpetual veto power over key EU and NATO decisions. The same corrosive mechanism applies to Viktor Orbán in Hungary.
While Orbán presents himself as an ideologue fighting for national sovereignty, his political shift from being a vocal critic of Russian dependency to being Moscow's most reliable ally in the EU was precipitated by suspicious financial and political interactions. The history of the communist-era KGB and its intelligence successors, including the notorious figure of Semyon Mogilevich and associated networks, suggests that financial compromise was successfully leveraged against Hungarian political figures. This allows Orbán to act as the primary political bloc within the EU, single-handedly freezing critical military aid packages to Ukraine and consistently softening the language of European sanctions. The strategic goal of funding these Trojan horse politicians is not abstract diplomacy. It is a direct military act against the alliance. The moment these leaders take office, they work to undermine the political cohesion of the EU, preventing a unified, rapid response to Russian aggression. Fico's immediate political course, halting official military aid to Kyiv and pushing a neutralist stance, is a profound strategic victory for the Kremlin. This internal fracturing is precisely what Moscow requires to guarantee the success of its military plans. They are counting on the political gridlock within the EU and NATO to ensure that when the next crisis erupts on a frontline state, the alliance will be too divided, too slow, and too compromised to act decisively. The only thing preventing a full European response is the bureaucratic leverage held by these Moscow-aligned proxies.
We have analyzed the military and political corruption used by the Kremlin. Now we confront the cruelest and most cynical front of this hybrid war, the deliberate weaponization of human misery. A systemic operation that uses migrants as a low-cost, high-impact tool to destabilize NATO's external borders. This is a targeted campaign of strategic engineering designed to fuel extremism and divert critical defense resources. The strategy is simple and brutal in its execution. The Moscow-Minsk axis is actively recruiting and transporting individuals, primarily from vulnerable regions in Africa and the Middle East, and directing them with malicious intent toward the frontiers of the European Union and NATO, specifically the borders of Poland and Finland. This is not a random migration pattern. It is a state-sponsored hybrid attack designed to create controlled chaos. Logistics firms and organized networks, often operating in plain sight, lure thousands of people with false promises of easy passage, only to shuttle them directly to the border zones of the alliance. The strategic motive behind this tactic is devastatingly effective and dual-layered. The first objective is military and logistical diversion. By manufacturing a crisis on a remote border, the Kremlin forces frontline NATO nations like Poland and Finland to commit massive and immediate security resources to border enforcement. Every patrol unit, every surveillance hour, and every military asset diverted to manage the migrant flow is a resource that is not available to support Ukraine or to reinforce NATO's military presence on the eastern flank. This is a low-cost operation for Russia that forces a massive strategic expenditure and military distraction on the part of the alliance. The second, and perhaps more corrosive objective, is political destabilization. The imagery of thousands of people arriving at the border is intentionally designed to amplify far-right anti-immigrant sentiment across Europe. This shockwave of anxiety directly fuels the rise of the very Eurosceptic and radical political parties that the Kremlin has invested in, the Trojan Horse strategy. The engineered crisis provides these anti-democratic political proxies with the perfect emotionally charged platform to preach division, condemn the EU's open borders, and demand withdrawal from international agreements. This ensures that the European political environment remains perpetually fractured and distracted, guaranteeing that a unified, strong policy against Russia remains politically impossible. The proof of this cynical strategy has been documented repeatedly. Finland's recent decision to close its entire border with Russia was a direct response to this systematic, centralized influx of individuals from distant countries, confirming that Moscow is using its border services to orchestrate the crisis.
This weaponization of migration demonstrates the profound moral vacuum at the heart of the Kremlin's strategy. It converts human suffering into political and military leverage, confirming that the war against the democratic world is being fought on every possible front, using every available resource to achieve a geopolitical outcome of chaos and paralysis.
The culmination of the hybrid war we have analyzed leads to one unavoidable, terrifying conclusion. The West's profound strategic failure to oppose aggression at the periphery is now directly inviting a catastrophic war on its own soil. The continued policy of hesitation and political blindness, the inability to neutralize compromised actors like Orbán and Fico, and the refusal to match the threat with necessary force, is read by the Kremlin as a guarantee of success for its wider destructive goals. The democratic world's greatest mistake was viewing the war in Ukraine as a distant regional conflict, a conflict it could safely outsource. This strategic denial persists despite irrefutable evidence that Russia's true objective is the total dismantling of the European security architecture and the paralysis of NATO. The failure of European political leadership is starkly demonstrated by their inability to act decisively against internal agents. When Viktor Orbán can single-handedly block massive financial aid to Ukraine and Robert Fico can halt military supplies, it confirms Moscow's central thesis. The democratic system is too weak and too divided to achieve consensus on survival. This weakness is not an incidental factor. It is the Achilles heel that Russia is actively weaponizing. This geopolitical paralysis forces us to recognize the final, brutal truth. The Ukrainian front is the sole functional shield of Europe. The millions of Ukrainian soldiers fighting are, by every metric, fighting a proxy war for the entire NATO alliance. Their battle-hardened forces, tempered by years of modern drone warfare, are the only force currently capable of holding the line against the brutal asymmetric tactics of the Russian army. Should this line collapse due to a lack of consolidated Western support, a collapse engineered by the very political proxies, the Trojan horses Moscow sponsors, the military vacuum would be immediate and irreversible. The consequences of continued blindness are no longer theoretical. If the Ukrainian defense is allowed to fail, the entire security dilemma transfers instantly to NATO's eastern frontier. Europe will then be forced to fight the war it refused to finance, but under the worst possible terms. It will find itself engaging a Russian military that is not only flush with victory and seized Ukrainian materiel, but also employing battle-tested asymmetric tactics. Critically, the fighting will be on a domestic level, as these invading forces will be supported by the very sleeper cells and neo-Nazi paramilitaries like the Slovenskí Branci that Russia has spent years training and funding on European soil. The war will no longer be fought by proxies in the Donbass. It will be fought against domestic extremists, political saboteurs, and military forces on the streets of the Baltics and Poland. Therefore, the only path to true security for the West is through immediate, total consolidation of will and resources. The choice facing Europe is stark: either fully commit to arming and sustaining the Ukrainian defense now, treating it as the most critical component of the continent's own security budget, or prepared to pay a price that will be historically and strategically catastrophic, fighting a war of survival against internal and external enemies on its own soil. The cost of strategic blindness is war.